Good morning, America. How's everybody doing today? And thank you for all my fellow veterans coming and joining us today. We got a special edition. We are going to talk VFW and Pact Act with a member from the VFW. And it's going to be fun today. Actually, too, I'm still looking for some Gulf War veterans that were exposed to sarin gas to come on the show, talk about their experiences. We want to work on getting you guys some extra benefits, but we need your stories. So please email me at the email that's scrolling on the bottom of the screen. Let me know your stories. We'll get you on air. We'll get your stories out there, and we'll get you folks taken care of. Also, last week we started talking about PTSD. How do you handle your PTSD? How do you fight back your demons? Email me, let me know, and we'll get you onto a future show. And on that note, I want to welcome Kristina Keenan from the VFW onto the show. How you doing, Kristina?
I'm good. I'm good, Tim. It's nice to see you.
It's nice to see you too. And awesome show yesterday with John Stewart and the other guys from the VFW. It's very informative.
Thank you.
And if anybody missed it, I'm sure Kristina will be able to tell us where you'll be able to go see that. John gave some insight on how he got involved with the Pact Act, and very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, we streamed our VFW podcast live on our Facebook page, so Veterans of Foreign Wars or VFW. And if you go there on Facebook, you can see the recorded video of us discussing, our involvement with the Pact Act, the advocacy work, a lot of the strategies and meetings and just the tireless efforts that VSOs, but also veteran advocates like yourself kind of went through during the whole process of passing this legislation.
Now, what is your title with the VFW?
So I'm recently promoted to Assistant Director of the National Legislative Service. So I'm based at the VFW's Washington, D.C. office, and I'm part of our legislative staff.
And what does all that involve?
So for me, we have a team of 7. We've divided up veteran issues, and we really try to advocate for a wide range of issues, primarily focused around healthcare and benefits, but also, currently serving military members, spouses, and families. So for me, I focus primarily on VA disability and legislation and policies that will improve the disability claims process. So toxic exposures kind of fell into that category because a lot of it is disability related. But I also work on, included in all of that are survivor benefits, veteran benefits, also burial benefits, things like that. So there's a lot kind of that I'm focused on, as far as ensuring that veterans and survivors receive the VA benefits that they deserve.
That sounds good. And now I know you were in the reserves, correct?
I was.
Or was it Guard?
I served in the Guard.
Yeah. In the Guard. Okay.
Yep.
And what unit were you assigned to?
So I was part of the 34th ID out of the state of Minnesota, and I served 6 years with them.
All right, and I understand you were also deployed to Bosnia at one time.
Yeah, I deployed to Bosnia in 3. Did a 6-month tour there, a little bit more than 6 months, and then volunteered for a second tour. So I did 2 tours in Bosnia.
And just maybe a little bit of history about the VFW. What does the VFW actually stand for? The name as far.
So the VFW stands for the Veterans of Foreign Wars, and so we're a membership organization. And so if someone has served in the military and also been part of a 30-day or longer contingency operation, whether they were in combat or not. If they, were part of an overseas operation, they may qualify for membership with the VFW.
That sounds good. And I know there's yearly membership fees, but that all goes to providing services for veterans. What are some of the more familiar services that the VFW does offer?
Yeah, I mean, I guess our biggest program is our service department. So we've got over 2,000 accredited service officers. So our service officers will assist veterans and their spouses and dependents and survivors with the VA disability claims process, free of charge. And we've been doing this even since before the actual creation of the VA. So we've been helping veterans get their earned benefits from the government, which is a complicated process, a very bureaucratic process. And we, as a VSO, as a veteran service organization, have access to the VA, the VA system, so we could see, how the claim is being, how it's being reviewed and where it is in the process, so we can really diligently assist veterans with their claims. I would say that's sort of our biggest program. But we've got a scholarship program. We have something called the Unmet Needs program. So if a veteran is in crisis and they need help with rent or with medical payments or something that's, a one-time payment that we can help them with, we have this Unmet Needs program. And so we've got a lot of programs. And so the membership dues, help kind of keep our efforts going.
Yes. And I can personally attest the VFW definitely helped me out with my claims. So
That's great.
Definitely a good program. And now I remember the first time I met you, which was in the swamp at the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
And when was the very first time you got involved with the Pact Act?
So I, in 2020, toward the end of 2020, the House of Representatives, the House Veterans Affairs Committee, held a hearing on the VA presumptive process. And that was my first opportunity to write a statement for the record and to do the research and to fully, for me, understand like what was broken about the VA presumptive process. And then shortly thereafter, in the spring of 2021, I was invited to testify before the House Veterans Affairs Committee on a whole laundry list, maybe 15 different pieces of pending legislation focused on toxic exposures. And that was kind of where I had the opportunity on behalf of the VFW to tell the members of this committee that with all of these pieces of legislation, let's put them together. Let's put them together as part of a comprehensive package. And our partners at DAV and at Wounded Warrior Project agreed, and they also testified in that same manner. And so that kind of helped to solidify what veterans wanted, what VSOs wanted, which was we're not going to just pass one bill at a time. Let's put them together into something that makes sense and that can really address some of the bigger issues within VA on toxic exposure, so we don't have to come back every time for individual pieces of legislation, that we actually fix the VA at a fundamental level when it comes to toxic exposure. So, this has kind of been the Pact Act sort of was born out of those hearings in early 2021. But, VFW has been advocating for toxic exposure, forever. And my involvement in 2018 was with the Blue Water Navy Act. And so I was starting to kind of understand really how long some of this legislation can take and how resistant VA can be to accepting some of the presumptive conditions. And so it's been a long process, but I would say the Pact Act started to form more or less in early 2021.
Yes. And you brought up a good point, how resilient the VA is in making change.
Right, right.
I think that was the biggest hurdle from even me being a Gulf War veteran 30
Yeah.
years ago. The VA put up so many hurdles
Mm-hmm.
and very reluctant to bring them down. And
Definitely.
so in your opinion, is that still going to be a problem with the VA, or do you think with this new secretary that he's going to start bringing those boundaries and those blockades down and start making it more veteran friendly?
Yeah, I think, it always depends on the administration and the particular secretary. Secretary McDonough said from the beginning that he intended to do something on toxic exposure, and he did. The VA did make strides with certain rare cancers, and also with sinusitis, rhinitis, and asthma. Those three respiratory conditions, I'm as far as I understand, are the most common. Although people aren't necessarily dying from those conditions, so they were not, necessarily on the top of our list of asks. So I think the secretary has shown, that the VA has been taking actions to try to improve their presumptive process, and at the same time, in parallel, was responding to VSOs and veteran groups, and members of Congress that wanted to pass legislation. So I think this was kind of all happening at the same time, and kudos to the secretary for wanting to do something on this, because past secretaries have not, or have been focused on other priorities. But the reason why we wanted the legislation, was so that it wouldn't matter who was in that position, it wouldn't matter who was in that job, that the law would stand, and that the process would be better than what we've had in the past. But VA will still need to write regulation and implement the Pact Act. So the work with VA is far from over. We'll really have to continue to collaborate with the administration on how this will roll out and impact veterans directly.
Now, the secretary himself, I believe it was at the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee hearing on the Pact Act, after the Senate had passed their version and they were going over the one that the House had sent over, that one of the comments that he made was he wanted to make sure he supported the Pact Act fully, but wanted to make sure it did become law. So just like you said, that future secretaries cannot rescind it at all.
Right.
And with that statement, did you feel the mood in the room change? Because I know we were both at that hearing at the same time.
We were. I had the opportunity to testify at that hearing, and we were, hopeful, but not. We were hopeful that the VA was going to support the Pact Act, but we weren't expecting it, because, the bill was going to impose a lot on the VA. So it's understandable if they agree with some of it, but not all of it. But the secretary was pretty clear, and really, it was such a relief to hear that the secretary said that the VA could implement the bill, that they wanted to bring more veterans into the healthcare system, and that they wanted to make the bill as good as it could be. And he had some suggestions for some changes, and they were reasonable. So we were relieved, and just very I think, very content in that collaboration. In that moment, it was great to hear it from him. It didn't change my testimony, which was really calling on Congress to take the Pact Act seriously, and for the Senate to move it forward, because the House had passed it pretty quickly, and the Senate wasn't sure. The Senate VA committee wasn't sure what route they were going to go. Were they going to go with a few smaller bills? Were they going to break it up? Or were they going to actually take up the Pact Act? So with VA on board, I think we had even more energy and ammunition to tell the Senate, this needs to happen. We need to pass this bill. Yeah.
Now, how does the core concepts and principles of the VFW all help support one another, such as membership, legislative, claims, and benefits?
Yeah, I mean, the VFW, exists to serve veterans. And so whether it's, membership, just bringing in new members and from the current era and from, from the current base of folks from the military and from generations past, the numbers that we have do help with our advocacy efforts. For me, when I testify, to say I represent over 1 million veterans, 1 million members of the VFW. The membership, which, some people say I don't have time to be involved with the organization, or I'm not sure if I want to, what this is going to do for me. But even being a member of the VFW officially on paper, it does help our advocacy efforts that we have, that we represent, that I represent such a large organization. Our claims and benefits side of the House helps us to understand the needs of veterans. When veterans have injuries or illnesses and they come to our service officers, we have all of that information about, what veterans are claiming for, what illnesses they have, what their injuries and their complaints are. And that really gives us a unique perspective on the veteran community at large. So that helps our advocacy efforts also, because I can come to Congress and say what the problems are with the claims process, with the disability exams process, because we have so many service officers assisting veterans, and those veterans tell us what's going on.
And what would you say to someone who qualifies for membership, why the VFW is the organization to belong to?
I mean, I would say, join all the organizations that speak to you. Really, there's no saying that you should only join the VFW, but if you qualify for the VFW, I encourage veterans to join and to become part of a community of veterans who, have similar stories, similar backgrounds, similar, health issues and injuries. And I mean, I spoke to a veteran who came to Washington while we were advocating for the Pact Act and just kind of stumbled upon our group. And he said he didn't feel, since leaving the military, he didn't kind of feel at home in his hometown anymore. And he had been homeless for a period of time, and he had PTSD. And I said, when you join a veteran organization, you realize that it's not just you. It's your story is like many of our stories, and we're all kind of struggling, but somehow we're in it together. And it's a great thing, even for me personally, being part of a veteran organization, and one as large and as sort of historic as the VFW.
Now, as far as advocating for the Pact Act, when did the VFW actually come fully on board? Because I know there were, like you mentioned, there were several other different bills out there for exposure and everything. Who and when got the VFW to come join all the other or help the other VSOs all join in to be one massive group?
Well, so we've had sort of coalitions of VSOs throughout this whole process, and we try to meet, on issues regularly, weekly even. So we had the Team Coalition, the Toxic Exposure in the American Military Coalition of veterans advocates and VSOs, and then there's sort of a core group of maybe 10 VSOs that meets weekly about claims of benefits issues. And so we kind of all know each other. We know our counterparts at the other organizations, and we have Zoom calls pretty frequently. And so as we were testifying and preparing for some of these hearings, we had a lot of discussions amongst each other about the merits of the legislation and which we supported and which we were not going to comment on. So that's just to explain that I think the VSO community has been generally on the same page for quite some time. The House introduced, we kind of collectively said we need a comprehensive bill. And the House introduced the Pact Act. The Senate introduced the Cost of War Act. And there were benefits to, there are pros and cons of each. The Pact Act had a longer list of presumptive conditions related to burn pits. The Cost of War Act had a more robust presumptive framework. So we were kind of, we liked things from both bills, and there were many bills, within those that we supported equally. So I think it was really the moment was when the House, when Chairman Takano took up the Pact Act, and with the Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, found a moment to bring it to the floor for a vote. And so once we saw that the Pact Act was moving and it was moving out of the House, I think the VSO community sort of put its full weight. The VFW and others, we put our full weight and endorsement behind the Pact Act because it had made it through that chamber. And we knew there might be some amendments on the Senate side, but I think collectively, once the bill passed the House, that was in March, we were full steam ahead with the Pact Act as a community.
All right. And how many legislative members do you have in DC, and how does the VFW choose which bills to support?
So legislative members, so within our organization, is that?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so we've got a legislative committee, a national legislative committee within the VFW. So these are appointed positions. We have at least one VFW member per state, but for some of the larger states, California and Texas, Florida, some of these higher population states that have a lot of members of Congress in the House, that we will have more. So those are appointed positions. Barring a pandemic, we typically fly them to DC twice a year, and they then go and meet with their members of Congress in their DC office in person to advocate for our legislative priorities. In fact, we've got our committee flying in on Monday, for our fall legislative conference. So they'll be here in a couple days, getting ready to meet with their members of Congress here in DC. How do we choose the bills that we support? So VFW, like some other organizations like DAV and American Legion, we are a resolutions-based organization. So every year at our national convention, we have our resolutions that get voted on by the membership, and those resolutions guide our advocacy efforts. So we try to cover as many veteran issues as possible, but typically our resolutions process is what guides our advocacy.
All right. Now, looking back,
yeah,
Jon Stewart had, for his very first episode of The Problem With, cover burn pit exposure.
Right.
And he interviewed the VA secretary.
Yeah.
Now, do you believe that interview is what woke the VA secretary up and got him to start supporting the legislation instead of his non-scientific theories?
I think that interview that John did with the secretary definitely, I think it did something. I think it showed to everyone, to the public, how complicated the presumptive process has been at VA, to the point that the secretary couldn't even explain it and justify it. And he, seems to be an intelligent person who has, really taken up a difficult job trying to run and improve the VA. But he fumbled through that interview when asked directly about the presumptive process and how was the VA going to, look at certain conditions that they had already approved, in comparison to other conditions. And that was really hard for him to explain, because as VSOs know, the process has not been transparent, it has not been clear, and it doesn't seem to have been consistent. And so it does seem that interview really did move the VA and move the secretary to act quickly and to work with veterans groups on that solution.
And it seemed right after that interview, Congressman Ruiz from California, Congressman Tim Ryan from Ohio, and Congressman Ticano, also from California, seemed to throw all their weight into the Pact Act and really start publicly supporting it. Do you feel the same way? That was the turning point to where the House of Representatives really got behind it and really made that big, huge push?
Yeah, I mean, the energy was kind of all around that same time. We have to remember also that the president had a State of the Union address where he mentioned toxic exposures and wanting to move that forward. So I think even pressure from, and this public statement by the president, I think, was also motivating the VA secretary to move forward on this. You had support from the House and Senate majority leaders, and they made public statements about that as well. So it became sort of inevitable that some kind of legislation was going to be considered. And so I think it was, the right timing and the right opportunity for Chairman Ticano to move the bill forward. And that then became the vehicle for this toxic exposure legislation. It became the avenue, and everything else started to kind of fall away. So I think that the momentum of that interview, plus everything else that kind of happened, all the other statements and all of the other press events that we were all doing collectively, kept that pressure and that momentum, because the momentum, in Washington is just so critical to getting things done. So you lose that, things can kind of get pushed to the side.
Right.
So I think all of this at the same time, it drove things forward.
Yes, I believe so too. And once watching the vote live on C-SPAN in the House, the first time they voted for it, there was a lot of, I wouldn't say heated, but lively debate about the bill. And the only opposition that anybody rose about the bill was the cost of the bill. What do you think was the factor that made a lot of those representatives change their mind and said, hey, it doesn't matter how much this costs because we're taking care of the people who took care of us?
Yeah, I mean, I talked to a lot of congressional staffers about the bill to educate them, so that because it's a huge bill, it's a huge piece of legislation, and just sending it to a staffer and then trying to meet with them and ask if they think their boss is going to support it or not is difficult when it's such a big bill. So the
Right.
meetings were really important to explain it to them, um, and they would often tell us, normally a piece of legislation that has been scored this high, that is estimated to cost so much, we would not consider. But because it's for veterans, we're going to consider it. And I think, one, because we explained it to so many offices, we did a lot of education, and also because it's very hard, I think, for any elected representative to say no to such a common sense ask: health care and benefits for veterans, for service members who risked their lives in service to our country, particularly in combat, and in combat environments. So I think it was very difficult for any of them to not vote for this. They didn't have at the time too many other issues with the legislation that they could point to give them an out. So I think that's why we had such strong support in the beginning, and not everyone was convinced that it would, even if it passed the House, that it would make it through the Senate. So I think for some it was, a low risk kind of vote.
And once it did pass the House and
Mm-hmm.
it did move on to the Senate,
Mm-hmm.
seemed there was opposition. Like you said, there was going to be opposition in the Senate, and they seemed to, and they mean Senator Tester and Senator Moran,
Mm-hmm.
the two who had the Veterans Affairs Committee in the Senate, at first seemed to bump heads.
Mm.
And because, of course, they had already written their own version of the bill,
Right.
and it passed unanimously in the Senate, but it was only for post 9/11 veterans. It didn't cover Vietnam. It didn't cover Gulf War. At what point do you think they finally realized that that bill that they wrote together
Mm-hmm.
was not going to go anywhere?
Well, because that bill, it was kind of funny what happened, because there was the Cost of War Act, which came out of uh, the committee, the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, from Tester's team really put that together and was trying to work with Moran's staff to get it solidified. Um, but I think in the end, well, there was a moment where they were really just trying to maybe tease out what they thought they could pass, and pass the the essence of the bill in pieces. And that first part was a healthcare portion. But really, what that bill would have done, and eventually was incorporated into the Pact Act, was simply extend from 5 to 10 years access to VA healthcare for combat veterans. Um, so when somebody separates from the military, whether they have a disability claim filed or not, they've got a certain period of time they can just get into the VA. And that had been 5 years. So they were going to extend that from 5 years to 10 years. And we
Mm-hmm.
supported that and had been asking for that for a long time, but also said that is really not enough. And that is not going to fix um, healthcare for toxic exposed veterans and for burn pit veterans. That it was not this. It's almost like that. They fulfilled a VFW ask, but I've been asking for a long time, previous to this discussion about the toxic exposure bill. So it caught us. It put us in a difficult position, because while we supported it, we had to also say that, but that's not even close to what we were asking for. So that was difficult. But I think, when Tester Moran held a hearing on the Pact Act after the Pact Act had passed the House, he held that hearing just on this bill. I think that gave VSOs and the VA the opportunity to say, this is the bill. I said in my testimony, the Pact Act is the one bill that we're now all behind. And so I think that brought them together, Tester Moran, to then come to an agreement. We put a lot of pressure, I think collectively, the VSO organizations, throughout that period of time, so that it was abundantly clear that we were all behind the Pact Act, and we wanted them to all be behind the Pact Act. So I think the Senate, the House and the Senate always have a different ways of doing things, and they're, the makeup of the House and the Senate are always a little bit different. So I think veteran organizations should be proud to know that they helped push the Pact Act at the right time and got Congress to kind of, realize that in the right moment.
Right. And having several organizations advocate for the Pact Act, is the Pact Act an example of how organizations working together would be more successful in passing future legislation?
It's a great example of how working together, we can achieve so much. Our coalitions still exist. We've got TMC, the military coalition that meets regularly, and then we meet on issues as well, whether it's survivor issues or toxic exposure, or education benefits. So these coalitions of veteran groups continue to meet together, and we discuss what our priorities are to see where we overlap, because it's true. Like any major piece of legislation that has ever been passed has been done not just by one person and not just by one organization. It's a collective effort.
Now, do you see in the future all the VSOs maybe forming a committee where they'll have a representative, and instead of supporting a bill and then bringing other VSOs into it, you all discuss it all at one time and eliminate the back and forth and just form a committee to where all the VSOs are together, say, hey, look, this is what we need, and see how all the VSOs at the same time, instead of making all these different phone calls, y'all just get together, maybe have a meeting once a year or something and discuss future legislation.
I mean, we've got our partnerships, longtime partnerships with the American Legion, DAV in particular, but we also have our independent budget partners at Paralyzed Veterans of America, VVA. Like Wounded Warrior Project has been a really strong partner over the last few years as well. And so those relationships aren't going away, whether it's formally organized or informal. We meet regularly on these issues, and we meet on the issue. I say on the issues because regardless of the legislation that might exist, we're talking about the problems themselves. And so whether we need to try to write something or suggest something, we will brainstorm which congressional offices we should maybe approach, might be interested in introducing legislation. So we're always thinking strategically, not only waiting for the bills to come to us. We're also thinking about the issues at hand and what solutions might work, and then trying to formulate legislation with our partners in Congress. So it's an ongoing collaboration, but it's by no means anything that stops with one bill. It's really an ongoing thing, and it's a community that the VFW is part of and continues to be a leader in.
Right now, just to let you know, some of the questions I've been getting are coming over the public chat room.
Yeah.
So just like this next question here from Paul: as the toxic exposure crisis from burn pits continues, we can expect that there will be a generational spillover of symptoms to our children. Are there examples of how the VFW has worked to help families affected by prior toxic exposure?
Yeah, I think the main example is for Agent Orange exposure. That is really, as far as I understand, um, the only exposure that VA has recognized conditions that can relate to their children, and that's spina bifida. So that's a birth defect that affects the child's spine and its development. So, the research, we rely a lot on research to understand, how, whether it's burn pits or any other exposure, affects veterans and maybe their fertility, maybe the genes that they're passing down, anything that could affect their children or children's children. I've even heard from, a childhood friend of mine. His father is a Vietnam Agent Orange exposed veteran, and now my friend's son, who would be the grandson, has epilepsy, and their doctor believes that it's related, but we don't have the science to prove that that's linked. So toxic exposure, is it's a difficult it's a difficult thing to advocate for, because it's so tied to science, and we're always faced with new exposures and new locations, and it's hard to really keep up with just the amount of toxic exposure issues that our service members and veterans have been dealing with.
Now, what happens to a bill in a new Congress when a new Congress is put into place? Does it go away? Do you have to resubmit the bill? How does that work?
Yeah, every Congress, at the beginning of the Congress, anything that didn't pass in the previous Congress will have to be reintroduced. Um, so we will often be advocating for bills to carry over, not to carry over, but to be also reintroduced, and that gives us another opportunity to get more co-sponsors and try to build support. But um, you'll see at the end of a Congress, which we're quickly approaching, often end of year bills that are trying to get very quickly all at the end of the year, passed quickly through. So we usually look at the NDAA, the defense bill for certain things that are DoD related, or some kind of benefits package through the Senate or House Veterans Affairs Committee. If there's some lingering issues that we want to try to push at the end, there's usually some of that will happen.
Now, there are some aspects of the Pact Act that we tried to let the general public know about, but it always seems to go back to everybody concentrated on health care, that the veterans were being denied by the VA. Now, there are people who believe that this bill is going to help veterans from becoming homeless, because now they don't have to decide between rent or their medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Help veterans from becoming addicts, because if they do decide to pay the rent, they no longer are going to rely on alcohol and drugs to kill the pain from their exposure illnesses.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
a very huge issue that I'm big on is veteran suicide.
Yeah.
Now, we know during our advocacy, some veterans decided to take their own lives because what the Senate did to the bill.
Right. Right.
Do you believe with the passing of this bill, this is going to give veterans hope that they didn't have before on getting taken care of? And do you think it can help bring veteran suicide down?
I think it can. VA has had such a high rate of denials for toxic exposure claims, for for burn pits. This is definitely going to help veterans get those benefits. Excuse me. Give me 1 second.
No problem.
Excuse me. Give me 1 second.
Right. Right. While you're composing yourself there, hey, Ed, thank you for bringing that up in the chat. Looks like First Capital Ruck 22 event in Chillicothe, Ohio is on October 15th. And they're going to have a free concert to help raise awareness and money to donate to groups that advocate for veterans. Thank you so much, Ed. We're going to, I want to see other people either email me or put that in the chat. We're going to promote your events so we can get more awareness out there so our veterans can get all the help that they can. All right. And it looks like Kristina's back with us.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, one thing I wanted to say on suicide prevention, one of the asks that the VFW has currently, and we will be presenting through our legislative conference next week, is that to better understand what veterans are going through, we need to understand where the breakdown in their access to VA benefits has come from. Where is that exactly? And VA has a lot of data within their benefits administration, whether it comes to a VA disability claim that was denied or that's still pending, maybe they're pending appeal. If the veteran was receiving education benefits or maybe applied for a home loan but got denied, those kind of things, we're asking VA to include that data in their annual suicide prevention report so that we can better understand not just was the veteran using the VA health care system or not, what happened to their benefits? Were they able to get their benefits, or was there an issue and that led them to taking their life? I think that the data, the information is really powerful. And so that is one of the VFW asks, is that the VA include the benefit data within their suicide report annually so we can better understand and hopefully see the links between the benefits that a veteran might receive or not receive and how that is directly linked, as we suspect, to their mental health and their their hope generally as a person.
Now, with a brother who was a veteran who decided to take his own life, that issue is extremely important to me. And through the years, talking with other veterans on that issue, it seems that, like you said, the constant denials from the VA, the lack of acknowledgement from the very people who sent us to war to begin with, is a driving factor in that issue. Absolutely. So I want to thank you for discussing that with me, and we're going to keep discussing that issue in the future, and maybe Kristina will come back on. We'll have a whole episode on just that issue alone. Absolutely. Now, are you familiar with the Major Richard Starr Act at all?
Yes, and it's actually one of the VFW's top priorities. This is a concurrent receipt bill, and what not a lot of people know is, if a veteran has a VA disability less than 50% rated from the VA, and they have their retirement pay, there's a choice that has to be made, or there's an offset. And what we're really concerned with is medical retirees. And because through no fault of their own, some of these service members had every intention of serving out their full military career until retirement, but then had an injury or an illness that, led them to a medical retirement, and they still, are experiencing this choice in benefits, which we believe is wrong. And so the Major Richard Starr Act, aims to correct that for this group of medically retired veterans.
All right. Now, we're getting close to the end of the show here. What is one moment advocating for the Pact Act that is the most memorable for you?
There's so many.
Yes.
I'll very quickly talk about two, actually.
Okay.
And you've mentioned it a couple of times, which was the Senate hearing on the Pact Act in March of this year, where the Secretary spoke and provided his support for the bill. And this, to testify in front of the Senate, as an advocate, is like, it's like the Super Bowl for us. It's really it's a big deal, and we're often expressing our organization's disappointment or anger at something not being done, and this is what urging Congress to do something. And this was the first time that I had the opportunity to kind of get loud. I mean, I slammed my hand on the table and said, we can't do this to veterans. We cannot continue decade after decade to leave toxic exposed veterans to have to prove to the VA their exposures. It cannot go on another day, another month, another year. And I mentioned the veterans in the room, and you were there, and there was a whole room full of veterans and their families and their survivors. The congressional staff had veterans, and just naming some of the veterans in Congress, because it affects us all. This legislation touches us all. So for me personally and professionally, that was a great moment, and a moment where I felt very proud to be representing the VFW. And I would say the second time was when we were in the Senate gallery when the bill passed the Senate the second and final time. And I was sitting in the gallery. We're all sitting in the Senate gallery watching the votes. And we were hopeful, but we didn't know exactly how it was going to go. And the three amendments were voted down, and they were going to vote on the final bill. And all these senators rushed the front of the room to put their hands up and say, yes, I'm voting for this bill. We didn't even need to count the votes. We saw it. We saw this move, this physical move, for all of them to put their hands up.
It seemed they were trying to push each other out of the way to be the first one to vote yes for it.
Yes. After all the debate, after all of the roller coaster, the ups and the downs, and the yes votes and no votes, finally they were all there to support the bill, as they had always intended to, apparently. And a lot of us just cried, we had so much emotion watching it. We didn't even need to count anymore. We were counting on our fingers how many votes, and we just stopped and we said, it's done. It's done. Yes. All of this is done now.
And I followed Rosie Torres out of the Senate building after the vote. Yeah. And as soon as she was able to turn her phone on and get reception and call her husband, she collapsed.
Yeah, it's
due to the emotion. She just plain collapsed. Now I'm trying to catch her. Jon Stewart's trying to catch her, and the emotion just seemed to pour out of that building, and you could see the media over in the Senate swamp knowing what happened just by our emotions when we came out.
Yeah, it was overwhelming, and you felt it. We were all there we were together. We all kind of made it somehow. We made it there. We were exhausted. We had been in the heat and then the rain for days. And it was just that physical, sacrifice, I think, that we all made, an emotional sacrifice that we made. And this was, for me, one of the most touching moments, that we were together and we saw the vote pass.
Yes. Now, I had mentioned Congressman Ruiz, Takano, and Tim Ryan from Ohio.
Mm.
Who are the members of the Senate that we need to thank the most?
I mean, I think Tester and Moran together, what pulled a lot of this off, and definitely Senator Schumer's office was in constant contact with us. But I think the fact that Tester and Moran in the end did work together,
Yes.
that is really what helped, because you couldn't have one or the other. They had to come together and agree, and I think I've thanked them, and their staff, because we worked so closely with them, and it's we might have worked with multiple all kinds of members and their staff more than others, but in the end, if they helped make it happen, they helped make it happen.
Right.
So we're grateful for everyone who voted yes in the end.
Yeah, I definitely want to get a thank you out there to Senator Sherrod Brown from Ohio and Senator Gillibrand from New York.
Mm-hmm.
They seem to bend over backwards for us to get us meetings with other senators,
Mm-hmm.
make sure we were taken care of physically when we were out there in the heat, made sure we had food, water, places to go to cool down.
Yeah.
They really, I believe, went beyond as far as what senators should do. They definitely took care of us when we were out there. So definitely want to give them some props.
Huge thanks. Senator Gillibrand's, her and her team. Yeah, they brought us into the Senate gallery. They made sure that we had the opportunities to speak at these press conferences. So definitely appreciate all of their help and support the whole process.
Now, one last question here. If you had to, would you do it all over again?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's no regrets, and we even had the bill not passed, I would have done it all over again, because it's a fight it was worth fighting, and we will continue to fight for it. Even if the bill has passed, there's still so much more to be done. So it's worth it, and it's hard. It sort of feels never ending, but the outcomes have been worth it.
All right. Well, I want to thank you, Kristina, for coming on today. This was
Thanks so much.
awesome interview, and it was great being able to advocate with you on this bill. And
Likewise.
Hopefully we can have you back on a later episode, and we can talk more about the Major Richard Starr Act and see how we can help you with that. And
sounds great.
Hope you can have an awesome day.
You too. Thanks, Tim. Thanks for all that you've done on this. Take care.
You're welcome. Thanks. All right, folks. And I want to thank Kristina again for coming on. I'm going to post information about the VFW up on the screen now, their website, and the phone number where you can get more information if you want to become a member or see how you can help the VFW. And also, let me bring this other screen up here real quick. PTSD. A lot of us have it. A lot of us are dealing with it. A lot of our brothers and sisters are having a very hard time with it. How do you deal with your PTSD episodes? Let's hear you. Your method might help somebody else out. So come on. Let's hear you, folks. Email me at tim@thegolfwaradvocate.com and tell me, how do you deal with it? Do you rely on talking to people? Do you go for nature hikes? Do you go to concerts? Do you create art? That's one method I use. I create art. That helps me deal with all my demons. Let's hear from you, folks. Let's get open discussion going about PTSD and how you and how you deal with it. All right, and I want to thank you all for tuning in today. And as you can see, I'm starting to feel better from COVID, so I was able to give you a pretty decent show today, and hope you enjoyed it. And we'll see you next week when we have a nonprofit on by the name of Veterans Off Grid. This nonprofit provides an alternative lifestyle to help deal with PTSD and other issues. And I think it's going to be a very interesting show. So tune in next week, and we'll see you then. Thank you.